Hi, everybody, and a warm welcome to this seminar. Today, it's organized by RISE, Growth Analysis, and Digital Today. It's called AI that Deliver Business Value. And the agenda is, first, I'll talk a little bit about the drivers of AI adoption. It's a literature review. And then we have Sverker from RISE, Applied AI Center. And he'll talk about Swedish AI use cases. And then we have Alistair and Nolan, our international guest, that will talk about AI diffusion and the new project that OECD is having. And then we're having the Q&A session, and then we'll also be assisted by Andres, yet another colleague from OECD. And then we go to next steps. And for housekeeping, you can ask your questions using the Q&A functions. And we are recording this seminar and we will comply with the GDPR. So if you have any questions, please just send me an email. And the recording and the slides will be disseminated to registered participants after the seminar. And here we go to the first slides. It's research on the business value of AI, and what we can see in the literature is that a lot of firms are seeing that they can add business value with AI. However, it's not a lot of firms that have managed to deliver business value so far. 40% of firms say that they have done significant investments in AI, but they have not reported any business gains yet. So there's a lot of things that we need to know that we do not know at this moment in order to get AI to contribute to firm performance. And then we have the current adoption level. That's important. We need a level of AI use that we are currently having. And you can see the figures from Sweden. It's official statistic. You see that 4% of small firms use AI, whereas 30% of large firms use AI. And that is something to bear in mind, that the AI use, when we accelerate it, these are the levels that we are accelerating it from. So that is also important going forward. And here we have the drivers of AI adoption, and this is what firms need to combine in order to adapt AI successfully. So it's about data that are used to train the AI models, it's AI technology, it's algorithms and AI system, but it's also IoT and cloud, and you also need to be able to compute all the data. And there's AI skills, so it's both technical skills and management skills. And we also have intra-firm coordination within firm collaboration between business units. And also you need AI business model to generate AI business. You need those important business model. And there's also the AI innovation ecosystem. So collaboration between government financiers, and then AI research and universities and firms. And there's also coordination across organizational boundaries. So firms always, not always, but many times they buy AI as an external, from an external provider. So there's need to be collaboration between the purchaser and the external AI provider. And that is new for AI. We haven't really seen that to that extent when it comes to digital transformation. And within this literature review, I also added a checklist. It's an evidence-based checklist. So it's based on practice-based research. And these are the bullet points: to pick a problem that is small but yet strategic, to make sure that AI is the right tool for the job. So don't use AI if you don't have to, but use it when it's right. And set AI-specific objectives and metrics for success, so you know when you're delivering business value. and list the data requirements, as we know data is crucial, and identify the resources and competences needed. And then also pinpoint the potential challenges, which could be regulatory compliance, for example, with the GDPR and the Artificial Intelligence Act. And then we have the report. This is what it looks like. It will be available online from October 20th. It's of course free. So I will also send you a note on that when it's available. And it's all in English with a Swedish summary. And then we go to the next speaker. We have Sverker Janson. He's director of RISE Applied Center for AI. Go ahead, Sverker.
Thank you, Irene. So I will talk about AI cases that deliver value and from my RISE perspective. Next, please. So I'll talk about this perhaps from a slightly technological point of view and along two themes of solutions. So one strand is industrial data analysis, which is a very powerful toolbox developed over a long time and now increasingly applicable and used in the digitalized era. And secondly, the more state-of-the-art, leveraging the power of state-of-the-art AI models. Next, please. So a few words about RISE. So we are the Swedish National Research Institute, 2,800 employees in 30, 40 sites from north to south and covering many industrial domains, most industrial domains, and also some public sectors. Next, please. And this also is reflected in how we work with AI. So this image, each box here represents people, projects, partner contacts, activities in different areas within RISE in over 120 projects with major AI content. So we have several research groups working on the driving technologies. We have research groups again working on what we here call the synergistic areas, which are actually absolutely essential for successful application of AI, innovation management, AI aspects of security and security for AI, ethics of AI, and so on. And not least policy recently with the EU AI Act proposal. And then lots of exciting, really, I'm so happy to work as sort of in the center for AI within RISE, because there are so many exciting application cases ranging from materials, next generation energy systems, every aspect of the vehicles and transportation systems, telecom, etc., drug development, and you name it, climate change solutions and so on. Next, please. So the first of the themes is the industrial data analysis. And just to give you some feeling for this, this is based on a large toolbox of sort of statistical machine learning tools that provide situation awareness and monitoring based on data. You can detect anomalies in data sets and data streams. You can diagnose the faults that you maybe discover using anomaly detection. You can predict the next steps of the development of systems, and more generally find structure, causal relationships, explanations, and so on for various phenomena. Next, please. And just to give two examples of this, so statistical anomaly detection is very widely used. We have done dozens of projects. This is just one example from condition monitoring of cranes with ABB. And as you can see in the figure to the right, these are various sensor readings in these systems, and some of these readings are very obviously, or not necessarily, but in this case, obviously anomalous, but some are more subtle. And the point is that the anomaly is derived from the combination of values, which is unusual and strange and needs to be sort of modeled in very carefully to find the anomalies. And this is very important to always monitor. I think this is a technology that should be applied everywhere where you have data. You should apply anomaly detection. Next, please. And then for doing diagnosis, so diagnosing is a sort of open-ended thing. There can be almost anything can go wrong, and you need to start somewhere. So we've developed a rather clever system called incremental diagnosis, where you can incrementally add what's called fault mode prototypes, where you don't need so much knowledge. You just enter what you think are a few related things, a few sensor readings and some type of fault, and the system will then start to incrementally learn based on the data how these are related and help you do efficient fault detection. And the figure here is based on diagnosis of vehicles, but again, this is something we've worked with many companies on. So these were two examples, and they sort of are almost not AI, but they are AI. I mean, there is no sharp border between AI and sort of statistics. It's a continuum, and increasingly what we call AI methods are used also for these data analysis tasks. Next, please. So just to take one step back and sort of talk about models. So the machine learning part of AI is about models of data, obviously. So this is just an illustration. We have these data points of areas and prices of houses, and we have the very, very, very simple model, which is the straight line, which uses only 2 parameters, and we can do prediction and we can find anomalies and so on based on this. Next, please. And then we come to sort of what we start thinking about as AI, and which appeared maybe 10 years ago, and now we take for granted these capabilities. It's really funny how rapidly it has happened, so that we can see what's in images, translate sound to text, translate between languages, and sort of do captioning of images. And these are still just not the same, but similar enough mathematical models. It's just that they are much larger. They have tens and hundreds, maybe. They vary a lot, a million parameters that sort of embed the knowledge in each of these items. And so these are, as you know, in production in your mobile phones and everywhere. Next, please. And what I want to convey here is now sort of the state of the art and how ridiculously expressive and sort of powerful machine learning models can be these days. So this is a case from OpenAI, DALL-E, and it's a model where the data points are images and descriptions of images from, I guess, all over the net. And the trained model can be used to predict an image from a text, a new text, and create entirely new images. And the point here is that the model has sort of built such deep domain knowledge about objects and their visual properties and so on, so as to be able to synthesize sort of images where something looks like an armchair and like an avocado at the same time. So of course you can't learn anything very specific from this, but just get sort of an intuition that, oh, wow, we have huge representational capabilities in these models. So this brings us then to the deep domain of models, and I'll give 2 examples. Next, please. So first, language models, models of English and Swedish, etc. And these have appeared in the last couple of years, and they are incredibly powerful, even larger than the model we saw, and revolutionize how we handle documents, streams of documents, streams of text of many kinds. We work a lot with Swedish authorities on this, where they already produce value. They are easy to just put into production, and also with some companies on error reports, just automating document streams. Next, please. And my last example is my favorite in many ways. It's sort of how we can now start modeling, or we already do, model chemistry. We can model the properties of molecules, of chemical reactions, and then use these to automate in silico various tasks that were until now very slow and cumbersome and costly to perform. So we can predict the toxicity of compounds. We can predict the outcomes of chemical reactions. We can plan the most efficient synthesis of molecules, and then apply these in, for example, drug development and the development of new battery chemistries. And this, for drug development, companies such as AstraZeneca are investing heavily and already are seeing payoff from this. And this is definitely the future of all chemistry. So with that, I have the next, just a summary slide. So I gave a number of examples from 2 sort of streams of the more basic, in some way, industrial data analysis, which very well established methods, which are already a staple of digitalized industry. I think maybe even more companies than the ones you list use products which use these methods and sort of implicitly use AI without even thinking about it. And then the deep domain models, which really have the potential to revolutionize and several industries. And I think we'll see just more and more examples of this in the future. So that ends my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sverker. And then we'll move on to the next speaker. We have Alistair Nolan, our international guest. Go ahead, Alistair.
Thank you very much, Irene, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to be presenting some new ongoing work at the OECD. This is being led by myself and by my colleague Irene Ek, who is also joining us for the Q&A. Next, please. So I'm going to be talking about AI in production and why this matters and how this is the foundation for, and it has to do with the rationale for our new survey work. Next, please. So why does AI in production matter? Well, a key reason is because of the problem of sluggish labor productivity really across the world. So I'm referring to the value of output produced per hour worked. And as I say, this has been stagnant for a number of decades, and it's been particularly hard hit since the financial crisis of 2008. Next, please. And this productivity challenge, also click again, please. This productivity challenge is all the more important given that the old age dependency ratio across OECD countries will double, almost double in the next 35 years. So those who are in work, those who are of an age where they are working will have to become ever more productive than they are now in order for society to pay for the age-related burden of a much larger non-working cohort. Next, please. So why is productivity growth stagnant? Next, please. When we have the advent of these productivity enhancing technologies, such as those that Sverker has just very interestingly presented, well, one reason has to do with the slow pace of technology diffusion, in this case AI. Next, please. This slow pace was already alluded to by Irene in her opening slides. Now, what do we know about the pace of the penetration of AI in across production? Well, there's a number of different types of evidence coming from survey work done by national statistics offices and other national agencies, and these are survey modules on AI which have been embedded in already established large-scale surveys of ICT use or of expenditure on R&D and so on. A second source of evidence comes from survey work done by some of the blue chip management consultancies, BCG, McKinsey, PwC, and so on. And then there's work done by academia and by a number of NGOs. All of these types of evidence have distinct characteristics and have different strengths and weaknesses. So the work done by the NSOs, the National Statistics Agencies, these have a strength of being conducted with very large sample sizes, 300,000 firms in the case of the US. But some of the modules themselves are rather shallow, just a few questions on AI, and they're not necessarily very revealing about some of the policy constraints on adoption and possible enablers. The work done by the management consultancies, often very small and unrepresentative sample sizes, some of the methodologies not always transparent, and dealing with constituencies, with respondents who are already intensive in their use of ICT. So next, please. So we, and this, as Irene had already said, that the large-scale surveys of AI in firms conducted by the NSOs, these tend to show very low rates of uptake really across the board. There's some variation in the survey responses, in the numbers. Across Eurostat encompassing areas, these numbers are fairly constant, but we see big differences, for example, with respect to Japan and some in the United States. But the overall story is that adoption is much lower than one would expect if one's reading the sort of ubiquitous news about the take-up of AI, and particularly low in smaller firms. Next, please. But this is a challenge, not just for AI. I think there are particular obstacles, particular difficulties in the adoption of AI, which differ, as Irene said, from other types of digital technology. But even in a mature digital technology such as cloud computing, here we see big differences in rates of take-up in the corporate sector from Finland on the far left, something like 70% or so of the entire enterprise population are using cloud, right down compared to a country like Germany, for instance, where only something like 15% of firms are using cloud. So next, please. So diffusion is a challenge in AI, but in not just in AI. So in response to some of the gaps in the availability of evidence, we're beginning new work in collaboration with the Boston Consulting Group and with INSEAD Business School, new survey work. And the aim is to generate a variety of new cross-country data and policy analyses on the diffusion and use of AI, and to do so in ways which are helpful to policymakers, which are novel, which are new, which complement existing survey evidence, and which, if possible, lead to conclusions, findings which are actionable on the part of the policy community. Next, please. Actionable in the sense, for example, that all OECD countries operate a wide range of institutions which have technology diffusion, the acceleration of the spread of these technologies as part of their remit, from well-known applied technology centers such as Fraunhofer to innovation vouchers used, for example, in the UK and many other countries, to dedicated field services like technical extension programs. And so we want to incorporate some questions in our survey work which try to better understand what kinds of services AI users or potential AI users would best require. What do they most want? What do they most need on the part of institutions of this sort? Next, please. So, for example, in our, maybe just one click back if you don't mind, thank you. In our survey, we are asking questions which really are not being incorporated in survey work so far. We don't think it's necessary just to, and we don't have the resources to replicate the work done by the national statistics offices, but that's not so important to do because we already have those gross or aggregate numbers. We know something about the broad pattern of AI diffusion across the corporate sector. So we want to try and home in, as I mentioned, on some novel issues. For example, asking questions about whether firms that use AI have engaged in public tenders around AI. Do firms use any public services? For example, for advice, information, finance, capacity building in the AI adoption process? Is the potential of AI in firms well understood, including in novel, more recent uses such as AI being deployed for training? Do firms consider that public agencies could assist AI adoption, and are there priorities amongst the types of services that public agencies could seek to apply? We all know that AI skills are scarce everywhere, but can we get at a more nuanced picture of skills scarcity? Do qualifications frameworks, for example, play a role? Next, please. And do firms have high, no, or low awareness of their national AI strategies at all? And various other questions of this sort that we intend to put. So next, please. So what's our sampling strategy? Where are we going to focus? Next, please. So far, we plan to look primarily at manufacturing and to look initially with a concentration on SMEs in manufacturing. Why focus on manufacturing? In part because the whole issue of Industry 4.0, of advanced technology in manufacturing, is of strategic and policy priority in most OECD countries. So over 30 countries now have Industry 4.0 strategies. Next, please. As Sverker was pointing out, AI is now being used in almost every stage of manufacturing, every stage of production, from product design to fabrication. For example, in the manufacture of silicon chips, where AI feature detectors look for some of the irregularities in the otherwise very ordered grid pattern on a semiconductor. You see those little red rectangles picking up where the flaws exist in process control, in training. Next, please. And in giving cognitive and other kind of support for workers. So here's the factory for the A350, produced by Airbus in Toulouse, and this AI system monitors every stage of the production process, and also every shift. And when a worker now encounters a problem, the AI can trawl through examples where similar problems may have arisen and suggest possible solutions. And this system actually has managed to reduce the time required to address disruptions by 1/3, which is a large return on investment. And my last two slides, please. One more. Click again, please. And another reason for focusing on SMEs in manufacturing is that the national AI strategies maybe are very strong in looking at what's going on at verticals in health, education, cybersecurity, often with the collaboration of very large service providers in these areas. And the national strategy is also at the lower end of the spectrum, putting in money into venture funding, for example. But in the middle, there may be an under attention to the needs of SMEs, particularly manufacturing. Next, please. And again, thank you. And this is my last slide. And we will complement the actual survey work. We'll marry this survey work with a series of case studies, particularly of AI adoption in larger firms. And we intend to undertake interviews with the chief technology officers, chief information officers, chief digital officers, etc., to try and get at a range of issues which are maybe too novel or too diffuse, too complex to really encapsulate in a survey how firms are dealing with a range of regulatory questions, for example, managing novel sources of AI-related risk, dealing with a number of data issues. So, and even how they are responding to a number of high-level principles which have been enunciated, for example, by the G20 and by the OECD intergovernmental agreement orchestrated by our organization to 18 months ago. So with that, I will leave the presentation and thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Sverker, and thank you, Alistair. So we'll go ahead to the Q&A. So if you have any questions on this presentation, or if you have any reflections, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. And in the meanwhile, I'll ask the participants on something on the link between AI and digital transformation. You mentioned that, Alistair. So I was wondering, have anybody of you thought a little bit deeper on that? What is the connection between AI and digital transformation?
Well, maybe two points. One, as Sverker very interestingly pointed to, I mean, this really is the sort of natural evolution of the sort of data revolution. It's where we will go next. But a point I would make is that there are, in the process of transformation, there are certain difficulties with AI which maybe distinguish it from previous generations of digital technology. One might be, well, there's a number. One might be that it's really not a plug and play technology. It requires complementary teams with maybe not just knowledge of data cleaning and the algorithms, but also, as you pointed to, Irene, the understanding of the hardware, so that the engineers, so that in a manufacturing context where you may have many machines of different vintages with different operating systems, so that these systems can all talk together and in a seamless way, and that data in silos, that the data relevant to supply chains might be held in a place other than the data held on customers, and that these need to be linked, brought together. But perhaps most fundamentally, it's maybe a question that there's a degree of uncertainty in AI projects. It's more difficult to calculate the return on investment. There's a degree of experimentation, which distinguishes it, I think, from other digital technologies. There's no a priori guarantee of success, and I think that also requires different approaches on the part of managers to deal with that higher level of uncertainty in their investment decisions.
Great, thank you. And now we have Andres who has comments on that.
Yeah, just to add to this crucial point that Alistair was raising, that not only firms need a mix of skills and capable IT systems that enable the development of AI solutions, but also like these sorts of investments are very ad hoc. They're tailored to a specific situation in the firm, and then those solutions cannot be easily exported to other firms as well. So there's no out-of-the-box solution, and this is yeah, one of the main reasons why the diffusion of AI is not progressing as one would expect.
Great, thank you. We now have four questions. So I'll start with the first one. It's from Hildegun. She's wondering, when focusing on manufacturing in the service, would you consider the service link in the manufacturing supply chain? Arguably, three of the functions in the chart on manufacturing are services, often provided by external suppliers. I think that question is for our OECD guests. Would anyone of you like to answer?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of points that come to mind. There's you know, one area we're looking at is R&D and sort of R&D services, and the way that well, as Sverker already alluded to with respect to drug research, but in other areas of research, say corporate R&D, where, for example, issues of new materials in the aerospace sector are extremely important. Maybe services around supply chain management. So BMW, I think, has the ambition at the moment of knowing in real time the status of every machine involved in producing important components in its entire supply chain network. So using AI to help manage that process is also important. Yeah.
Great, and I see we have a follow-up questions on the AI case studies that will be performed by the OECD. It's from Patrick. He says, great presentation. It's a question to Alistair. Are you also planning to capture the degree to which firms are adopting responsible practices of AI?
Yeah, well, you know, I think there's something like 60 overarching principles around AI, which have been developed internationally and by various national bodies and AI associations and so forth. And I think there's a question, and there time and again, the whole issue of responsible and ethical and human-centered AI, these are the sort of buzzwords which are ever present, but in an industrial context, it's very hard to know what a human-centered AI system and industrial production process actually means, or responsible AI. The primary concern is accurate AI, reliable AI, effective AI. And so I think what we'll be interested in knowing maybe is where issues of quote responsible AI actually how they link to success in an industrial context, if at all. Are CEOs and CTOs actually concerned with this concept? Do they see that there would be business value in somehow? What do they understand by the concept of responsible or ethical AI? What relevance is it to their business? And so I think we'd want to try and get that in the case studies. Get to that in the case studies.
Great, thank you. And we also have a question now on from Linnea Holm on whether we have a strategy for Industry 4.0 in Sweden. And it's included in our Smart Industry strategy. And I see that Andres is also typing an answer to that, so that will come shortly. We have yet another question from Sophia. Do we know that the production is increasingly done in, we do know that production is increasingly done in global value chains. Is there a role for international trade policy in supporting the diffusion of AI? And Andres, is that maybe something that you would like to take?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So for the for trade policy and diffusion of AI, I think it's the issue is the roles that the big players have in so we see that the AI solutions or the firms that are most capable in AI are the big international players, and yeah, countries can attract such players. So we see in Ireland the presence of Facebook and other big tech firms there with so there are these types of measures that allow attracting large firms that would eventually connect with the country's internal value chains, and this is a way of indeed of helping diffusion. But this is only one, I mean, one part of the picture here, and yeah, it requires, as Alistair was saying, more efforts on the side of the diffusion agencies that countries have to really give examples for small firms and SMEs to see what is the potential for AI investments. That's one of the also like one of the problems that small firms have, that they don't know, they don't have a clear visibility of what the possibilities are. So having these types of proof of concepts that are available by the public actors, showcasing them, having demonstrators are other ways that could help diffusion. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Could I maybe add just one point there?
Yeah.
I think it's maybe not so widely appreciated just how much data is generated in industrial processes. Industry actually generates more data than any other part of the economy. And so a big issue around relevant to supply chains and relevant to the efficiency of AI using firms is that global trade in data, the transmission of data across borders the rate of growth of this has far exceeded the rate of growth of trade. And that if countries are going to adopt practices which restrict the transmission of data across borders, then the evidence is beginning to show that this will raise the costs of doing business for firms and may even actually slow down the rate of FDI, foreign direct investment, into those countries.
Great, thank you for that. And we have the last question. It's from Thomas in the north of Sweden, and he was wondering, I'm interested in the views of SME, the views SME has on data. Do they accept data-driven decisions? Do they see value in data? And they're looking into the status of data in SME. And I was wondering, this might be a question for you, Sverker, that are working actively with the different types of organization. Is this something that you've seen maybe?
Thank you, Irene. I think someone with a more sort of economy outlook should answer as well, but I can just give you some anecdotal evidence that the small companies we come into contact with typically are very proficient, sort of very advanced in leveraging data for creating value within the context of their products. But I don't think they are anymore. If data-driven decisions refers to sort of their business practices and how they understand their market and so on. Of course, some market data I think they can analyze, but on the whole, I would say they are do business in the same sort of human-oriented way as most companies still do. But maybe someone of the other panel members has data on this.
Yes, Alistair, maybe?
Yes, I mean, I think an issue is, in addition to size, it depends what sector they're working in as well. So firms, for example, which in some sectors like insurance, like in finance, like in online retail, etc., these firms may have quite a long history of working with data. So there's more of a culture of data there. Whereas for firms in the manufacturing sector, which have been more product-led than data-oriented, I think that these firms maybe will face more of a challenge, it's more of a cultural transition to engage in, especially in a country like Germany, for example, where many of the firms are like family held for a long period of time. There's, for the same reason that, as I pointed out in the graphic, that there's a great deal of hesitancy in using cloud computing in Germany. There's a whole issue about data security, and letting data leave the company boundaries is something about which there's a great deal of hesitancy. So yeah, I think it's more to do with the sector than with size. Although, as I say, and as you've pointed out, the smaller firms are adopting a whole slew of digital technologies at a much lower rate than our larger firms.
Great. Andres, would you like to add something, or do you think that?
No, just to say that yeah, indeed, these smaller firms, they struggle more in making the necessary investments to have like a data management that is required to work with AI. So just adding to that.
Yes, and now I see that we have come to the end of the seminar. So I would like to thank our excellent speakers, Sverker, Alistair, and also Andres. And I would like to thank also the participants for excellent questions. And we'll keep on producing reports in this area. And I will make sure to let you know when we have the literature available. And there's also a forthcoming study on AI use cases. So unfortunately, that will be in Swedish. So, but we'll make sure to have a thorough English summary of that. So I would like to thank you all for making this a really great seminar. Thank you.
Thank you.